What is going on, my YouTube friends? It's good to see you guys again, or at least talk to you. In this video today, I wanted to give you guys kind of like a fundamentals / basics of MicroStrategy stock. I realize I haven't made one of these videos, and there's probably still a lot of people that don't know, a lot about MicroStrategy or what they do or their whole Bitcoin treasury company business model. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. It is a little dark. The sun is just now rising at 6:30 a.m. here in Wichita, Kansas. So bear with me. Hopefully you can still hear me just fine. But it should get actually lighter during this video. So you should be able to see a little bit more, even just 5 minutes in, 7 minutes in. Okay. And with that, definitely subscribe to the channel if you're interested in Bitcoin or Bitcoin treasury companies or AI or anything like that. Just stock market stuff. Because that's what I make videos on every single day. And yeah, let me know down in the comment section below what your price target is for MSTR. Okay, so I'm gonna start off from the beginning here, so you guys can hopefully just be like an all-encompassing video about what MSTR is, what it was, and what it's going to be. All right, so MicroStrategy is a company that accumulates Bitcoin on its balance sheet, right? And the way it does that is multifaceted. So in other words, there's a bunch of different ways that they achieve that goal. Currently, their market cap is around $80 billion, $85 billion, something like that. So they're definitely not a small company. And they've got 60, 65, 70 billion dollars, depending upon the day, of Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? So they're a Bitcoin treasury company, like I said, with their entire goal is to accumulate Bitcoin in an accretive way for shareholders. So they're kind of the pioneer when it comes to this whole industry as far as Bitcoin treasury companies, as well as they're the pioneer for like the term Bitcoin per share. Okay, so essentially what they try to do is they try to increase that number, which is Bitcoin per share. So that's either, to do that, you either increase Bitcoin on an accretive way, so increase Bitcoin more than shares increase, or decrease shares. It's basically the only way you can do it, Bitcoin per share. It's just like a ratio. You got Bitcoin as your numerator, and then outstanding shares as your denominator, right? So it's make the top number go up, make the bottom number go down, or make the bottom number go up at a slower rate than the top number, right? It's pretty simple stuff here. And historically, so I guess what they were, right? They were a business intelligence software company, right? So what that means is that they were, somewhat similar to SAP. You guys are familiar with SAP, as well as just like POS systems at like restaurants. What they were doing is they were just basically creating B2B, business to business software that helped businesses, operate on a daily basis, right? So, yeah, and you can imagine that's a very competitive niche, right? So basically, that's what they did for over 20 years, and even like during the dot-com bubble in 2001, 2002, like their market cap was flying high with the Amazons and Microsofts of the world. But then, as time progressed, we saw who the true winners were, and MicroStrategy was not a winner. It was a failure, essentially, because, like even in 2020, that's when they pivoted to their Bitcoin treasury operation. They pivoted their entire business model. They were only worth like $1 billion, a couple $1 billion, like nothing. Like not nothing, but very small amount compared to Microsoft or like Amazon, some of the big dogs. So they realized that basically in order to compete, they needed to have the capital to compete with Microsoft, Amazon, these types of companies, and they just didn't have it. So they made the brilliant decision to essentially become a Bitcoin treasury company when that didn't exist yet. They basically pioneered the concept, right? And one of the biggest things, I think a lot of people thought about doing this, but it is like you have to be ready for the ridicule. And Michael Saylor, he is the guy that runs the company. He's the guy that pivoted the company. He had to present this to the board of directors, and he had to endure probably a lot of ridicule in the past 5 years, right? But then fast forward to today, it's November 2025, where now MicroStrategy is one of the most heralded companies in the world. I mean, as far as treasury companies go, like how much US dollars they have on the balance sheet, if you look at, I guess don't even look at it by US dollars, look at it like short-term investments and cash on hand, right? If you look at that little tick on their financial reports, MicroStrategy is now like a top 5 company in the world. You're talking they have more money than 90% of your large cap blue chip stocks, right? I mean, maybe the Googles, the Apples, the Microsofts, you know, those types of companies maybe have a little bit more, but I believe MicroStrategy is literally like a top 5, if not for sure a top 10 treasury company, just treasury in general, in the entire world. So that's where they're at today, right? So they used to be a business intelligence company, writing software, writing code, writing the heuristics, right, to try to help businesses operate better. They failed essentially, and they didn't grow their market cap. They were a zombie company, as they call it. Their stock had no volatility, right? So nothing was going on. And then in 2020, boom, pivot changed. And since then, MicroStrategy has seen twice the appreciation that Bitcoin has in the same time. So that's a huge deal because Bitcoin's up a lot since 2020, right? It's up a lot. The way that they've accreted Bitcoin is via dilution of equity. So basically taking investors' money that's invested into them, and issuing more outstanding shares and buying Bitcoin. And like I said, they've only done this in a way that's accretive to shareholders, right? So in the long term, basically the idea is you buy the MicroStrategy shares and you have a certain Bitcoin per share when you're buying, right? But as long as they continue to accrete Bitcoin accumulate Bitcoin in an accretive manner, then your Bitcoin per share will go up. So essentially the amount of Bitcoin that you own personally increases over time because your shares, let's say you don't ever buy any more shares, your shares stay the same, but the Bitcoin that the company has is more. And maybe I'm explaining this in a confusing way. I feel like it was a little bit confusing, but essentially, like I said, your Bitcoin per the amount of shares you have will increase over time, and they've made that clear. They're not going to accumulate Bitcoin in a way that is not accretive to shareholders, right? So just hear me out on that one. And if that doesn't make sense, just go on Google or go on ChatGPT or something. Sorry, and go check out, what is Bitcoin per share? How has MicroStrategy accreted Bitcoin for shareholders? And use that specific word, accretive, right? So they've historically done it with the equity, but then they've also done something to pioneer these preferred perpetual shares of other ways of essentially for them to use other people's money to buy more Bitcoin for the company and for the shareholders in an accretive way. Accretive is definitely, like I said, the key word here. So they've got like 5 or 6 other, and I imagine these will continue to increase. The number of different stocks they have, that essentially you can invest in this stock. It'll give you a certain dividend rate. It'll give you a certain alignment with MSTR or Bitcoin. And it basically, these different perpetual preferred stocks, they try to capitalize on the different sectors in the market where an investor would want to invest their money. So let's say, and the biggest one being the bond market, right? So they've got Stretch, for instance, right now, which gives investors a 10% dividend yield every single year, right? So the, if you want to, there's my dog. I'm taking my dogs to daycare. There's another one back there too. Where was I at? Yeah, so 10%, right? So if you go to SoFi or you go to Cash App or you go to any other, some of the higher yielding savings accounts, right? You're only going to get 3-4% a year in your savings account, right? And Stretch is essentially trying to take from your savings account because they're going to give you 10.5% dividend yield every single year, right? So they're just annihilating the compound annual growth rate of these savings companies. And they're able to do that because they are convicted that Bitcoin will go up 30 to 40% a year. So if they're going to pay you 10% for dividend yield, then use your money to go buy Bitcoin, and they're 5x or more over collateralized on the amount that they're taking from you and the amount that they already have, right? So they're limited on the amount of shares they can issue with respect to Stretch or with respect to any of these other preferred stocks, right? They're limited because they need to stay over collateralized so they don't essentially get margin called or anything bad happen, right? But if you've got 70, 80 billion dollars of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, right? So that means that potentially you could, if you're 5 or 6x over collateralized, you could have another 10 billion, 12 billion you can issue in preferred stocks and use that money to go buy more Bitcoin, right? So that's their whole business model. And as Bitcoin grows, so does their position sizing in Bitcoin, so does the amount that they can get in these preferred stocks. And it's just kind of like the more money it gets, the more money it can invest. The more money it gets, the more money it can invest. And over and over and over again, right? So that's where we're at today, right? Now for the future is a little bit more like hazy because, like I said, this is like you're pioneering a new industry here. Like they are the preeminent crypto treasury company, Bitcoin treasury company in the world. There's no one in the world that has more Bitcoin than them other than maybe like a BlackRock ETF, maybe one of the, like China's government or the US government, low-key, and they're not telling anybody, or some other government, you know. But as far as we know, it's like a top 5 Bitcoin treasury in the whole world, right? So what they can capitalize on this, it really depends upon the Bitcoin price over time, right? So if Bitcoin goes to $1 million by 2030, that means that their $70 billion today that they have in Bitcoin is now worth $700 billion. I don't know any other company that has $700 billion, right? And nowhere near it, actually, as far as just like cash or short-term investments on hand. That doesn't exist. That's like government levels of money, right? So that's crazy, especially when you think about they don't need to execute. Like literally all they do is hold an asset that is extremely volatile and has a 99% compounded annual growth rate since inception. Since 2008, 2009, Bitcoin's went up almost, like I said, 99% annually. So that's a huge deal. And they own, like I said, $70 billion of it. So let's just play it out. Like let's say, you know, in 2030, you know, Bitcoin's $1 million per coin. So they've got $700 billion, you know, on the balance sheet just in Bitcoin, you know. So they're, you know, Michael Saylor, the guy who runs MicroStrategy, has said many times that even when Bitcoin's $1 million a share, he'll probably be buying billions of it on that day. He's like going to continue to buy Bitcoin forever. It's not ever going to change that he doesn't buy Bitcoin, right? And maybe one day he'll stop. I don't know, but it sounds like forever he's just going to perpetually buy what he considers to be the hardest asset in the world. I also consider it to be the hardest asset in the world. So if it's worth $700 billion in, you know, net asset value, right? So that's just the Bitcoin on its balance sheet. There's probably going to be some sort of premium associated with that because they continue, even if it's $1 million, they're going to continue to buy with other people's money, right? And when they do that, like they're just, you know, creating more Bitcoin for shareholders, and then in a few years, the Bitcoin price is going to be up huge again. So it's like these, like the Bitcoin treasury company probably does deserve a premium. How much that premium is, that's market based, right? So what I'm getting at is if they have $700 billion in Bitcoin on the balance sheet, the company could be worth 800 billion, 900 billion, a trillion, over a trillion. It's really up to market sentiment and market, you know, what the market wants to pay, right? And so the biggest thing about the future too that I want to bring up to you guys is that it's a big question mark because we don't have any companies right now that have $700 billion on the balance sheet, right? And when you get to that kind of money on the balance sheet, what happens? Like, what is your next play? What is your next step? If you guys have any ideas on what MicroStrategy could do for the next step after they get to, you know, let's say hundreds of billions of dollars or $1 trillion of short-term investments on the balance sheet, let me know in the comment section below because that's not super clear, right? But like the idea that there could be potentially like more business models added on top of that, I think is very, very high. I don't think that they're just going to stop and be like, okay, we're just going to continue to buy Bitcoin. I think there's going to be other business opportunities related to the Bitcoin that's on their balance sheet. I still think that their operations will basically be centered around Bitcoin. I don't think they're going to change from that. But you know, we're in unprecedented times when it comes to Bitcoin at that price and a Bitcoin treasury this large, right? So for me to sit here and say, I think that this is going to happen or this is going to happen in 5 years with a company that we've never seen have this much money, like just, it's never happened. you know? Like, that's what's very exciting as well. So it's not only that you have a 10, 20, 100x possibility with this stock, in my personal humble opinion from a guy on YouTube, but it's like there are so many opportunities that I can't even think of, right? When you have that much money, how you can be over collateralized with like so much stuff, where it's like, yeah, maybe MicroStrategy doesn't want to own 10% of Bitcoin, but they're going to get to like probably 5%, 7%, 8%. And to where like, I still believe Bitcoin will be considered decentralized, right? There's not one central owner of Bitcoin, because there's all these people and all these funds, all these institutions, all these governments, all these things that own 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, right? So it's definitely less decentralized than it was at inception, but like now it's a little bit more centralized because these certain institutions and entities own a lot of it. So yeah, guys, I don't know what to think. Like I said, the future is huge. We don't know what's going to happen. So, but that's kind of the bullish thesis behind MicroStrategy. So with that, guys, definitely subscribe to the channel below and let me know what your price targets are.